Hey, hi, hello. Welcome to Diana Emerson today. We're listening to Wild Crime, and this is Answers.
When I learned more about Patty Dahlstrom, found out her identification, my feeling about the case didn't change. The one thing that did change was the sadness of actually seeing what you look like, really putting a face to a human being. All of a sudden, Patty became real.
I mean, we were both pretty excited to think, oh my God, after all these years, how remarkable the science was that they could pinpoint it to one person out of all the people on this planet. It is really remarkable.
My first goal in taking this case over was to identify who she was. Once I had a name for the victim, Patricia Dahlstrom, that's when I really started trying to learn as much as I could about Patricia, where she was from, who her family is, and try to figure out how she got to Yosemite and what happened. I really tried to learn as much as I could about her. There wasn't a whole lot. The only record we have is she's mentioned as a surviving daughter in her mother's obituary. And they listed her relatives. Her older sister was alive, and her nieces and nephews are still alive, and they're all adults. So I just start calling them one by one. No one's answering the phone. I'm leaving voicemails. Hello, my name is Colin Tucker. I'm a special agent from the National Park Service. Can you please call me back? None of them answer the phone. I waited about an hour, and it's like burning me now inside. So I leave them all voicemails again. They don't answer. But I start calling them again. And eventually one of them answers the phone. And I was like, does the name Patricia Dahlstrom mean anything to you? And she gasps. That's my aunt. We haven't seen her in 40 years. The hairs on my arms are like standing up and talking about it. And I go, we need to talk. I fly in mid-April of 2021 and interview the family. Sitting there with the family in their house and like explaining everything. And I'm like, hey, I'm conducting a homicide investigation that started in Yosemite National Park in 1983. It was skeletal remains when we found the victim. And, through some advanced DNA work, like 2 days ago, we got your aunt's name. And I have to tell you that she's a victim of a homicide. And the victim of a homicide probably from a serial killer named Henry Lee Lucas.
After I got out of the car, we set out to Grand Beaver for maybe 20 minutes. And I told her I had to go, and she didn't want to, and I said, well, I just leave you here. And so I took and strangled her to death.
This is crushing. They were devastated.
I'm certain that every day somebody thought, I wonder if she'll call. I wonder where she is. But then to finally be told, just suddenly one day she's been dead this whole time, would have been heartbreaking.
Her family told me Patty moved to California and she was kind of in this cult. She kind of stopped communicating with us. The last contact they ever got from Patty was a picture she sent her from the beach from September of 1982. the last contact between Patty and her sister ever. Patricia Dahlstrom was a real person. She was a woman and a sister and an aunt, and she had friends.
Hello, pretty lady.
Hello there.
Oh, it's so nice to see you. Let me put this down.
Okay.
Morning. Brought some annuals.
Oh boy.
It's like there's some pictures there too.
Yes, I brought pictures.
This is the 1970.
So it was our first year at Rogers.
Yeah. I'm looking for Patty. There she is. Oh, look at that cute picture.
I first met Patty Hicks when we were in 6th grade. In 8th grade, that's when we became best friends. The first thing that attracted me to Patty was she was loud and boisterous and she cussed. And I so admired her. We loved just walking along talking. We had a wonderful time entertaining one another. In the summertime, Patty and I would walk over to Hilliard Pool, and she loved roller skating. She was really quite a good roller skater. I have a whole lot of very good memories that warm my heart, and I just thought she was great.
Oh, who's that?
Oh my gosh, that's me. And I'm going for the same hairstyle now. Show me your picture.
Oh, no.
So there you are.
I met Patty at Shaw Junior High School in 7th grade, about 1966. God, that's a long time ago. Patty was a very cute girl, a very cute girl. Patty and I, we kind of had a crush on each other.
Oh, Patty.
Isn't that a pretty picture?
Oh, it's a beautiful picture of her. I loved Patty. She was really my very first close girlfriend. In my teen years, I was closer to her than anyone. Her family life was not as smooth as could be. Her dad drank a lot. Her mother was quite protective of her. Patty had one sister and one brother. And her brother Ed was in the Coast Guard and stationed in the Seattle area. Patty adored her brother. She worshipped him. It was 1971, and I believe we were juniors in high school. Patty showed up on my doorstep. She was in tears. She was hysterical. And she charged in the house and she said, "My brother is dead." And she said, "We just got notified by the Coast Guard that they found him with a gunshot wound in his head, and they're saying that he committed suicide." Patty changed significantly after Ed died. It had a traumatic effect on her. After her brother Ed died, I think that was the point of change for Patty. Patty just didn't have that zest for life anymore. It was gone. She went inward. Prior to his death, she was interested in reading spiritual books, and when he died, she just immersed herself in that sort of reading. I think she just so desperately wanted to understand why in the world he would commit suicide. Just didn't make sense that he would kill himself. Patty and I graduated from high school in 1972. Once school was over, my family went on a cross-country trip. So I didn't see Patty again for the rest of the summer, but she did mention that she was seeing Ed Dahlstrom.
There's Eddie, right at the top of the table.
Oh, let me see. Oh, yes, he looks like he still has his baby look in
Big
this
Eddie.
picture.
I met Ed Dahlstrom in band class, and we became pretty close friends for a long time. Eddie was a character. He and I had a lot of fun together.
When I returned to Spokane, I heard through other friends that Patty and Ed had gotten married.
I was shocked to hear that they got married. Eddie was a fun-loving guy, and that's might be what she saw. Having the crush on Patty that I did. When I found out that he had married her, of course I would be a little jealous, but I was also happy for them. I didn't really get to see them together too much, but Pete's Coney King was right across from the gas station I used to work from. I went over to get a sausage that I liked from there. I saw them together and they were talking. I felt a weird vibe, and I just knew I came in the middle of something and then I should get out, and so I did. I heard Patty filed for divorce in 1974.
Patty never told me why she divorced Dad. I didn't really see Patty during her marriage. We just didn't really have much in common anymore. The closeness wasn't there anymore.
Look how cute and young you guys are.
I think we were about 25 years old in that picture. I also think it was the last time that I saw Patty.
Oh, really?
The last time I saw Patty, I was visiting my family in Spokane. She came and picked me up and took me to her apartment, which was very sparse. Her bed was in the living room, and it was just a little mat on the floor with some blankets. And the only other thing in the living room was a little altar that had an 8x10 of, I call him the Maharishi. I don't know who he was. Patty talked about the people she was involved with. They did yoga. She did lots of meditation. The man who led this group told her that she was vain about her hair. And so to do away with vanity, she shaved her head. He also told her that her mother was the devil. I really didn't know what to make of all this. It seemed like she was involved in a cult. When I walked out of her house, it really felt like goodbye. Goodbye for a long time. At this point, I had resigned myself to she was involved in a cult. She was lost, and I wish I had grabbed her and taken her back to Alaska with me.
what's dangerous about a cult is that it robs you of your identity. You trade in your autonomy, the truest part of who you are, for easy answers. I think one of the most important things to understand about cults is that what happens is psychological manipulation. I'm Diane Benscoter, and I joined a religious cult when I was 17 years old. I was in that group for 5 years. After 5 years, my family had me deprogrammed. And then I became a deprogrammer. People often ask me if anyone can fall prey to this, and I think it's more a certain situation in a person's life. It sounds like Patty's losing her brother to suicide was probably super hard for her. It's so normal and natural when you feel lost in your world to look for comfort and to look for a way to feel safer and a way to feel like you belong.
2 years went by and I called Patty's mom and the phone was disconnected. So I looked at her sister and she told me that her mom had died and said, I have not talked to Patty in a couple of years and I don't know if she even knows our mother is dead. After I had that conversation, I pretty much gave up on ever getting in touch with her again. That was in 1983.
As close as you guys were, that shocked me that there wouldn't be any communications.
Yeah. Patty went south and I went north. She went to California and I went to Alaska.
From what her family told me, they remember her bringing this guy to their house and she stayed with him for a little bit, and then Patty eventually moved to California with him. The nephew was like, well, have you ever heard of a town called Merced? She was living in Merced. At that point, you could have pushed me over with a feather. Merced to Yosemite is 75 miles away.
Merced is a small agricultural working class town, and it's one of the main access points from the Central Valley to come up to Yosemite.
Come back home, and I started looking in public records for Patty's last known address. And I found it. And I'm like, well, who lives there now? I was able to do public record search online through the county records. And the same woman who lives there today had lived in that house in 1983. And we ended up learning that was Patty's roommate, Patty's friend. And I'm like, oh my God. And so call her up. She answers the phone immediately. And I kind of do the same thing. I'm from the Park Service, I'm a special agent, and do you know Patricia Dahlstrom? She doesn't know that Patty's been killed either. So I tell her, of course, it's very emotional. She's like, we were in a cult together. And at that point, that's when I learned the name Donald Gibson. There's a whole other part to Patty's life that starts when Donald Gibson enters your life.
My name is Jennifer Randall, and Donald Gibson is my ex-brother-in-law. I remember Donald Gibson as a scrawny little guy with oversized glasses and very short hair and a squeaky voice. Donald had a horrific childhood. The father was a staunch disciplinarian and quite violent in the rearing of his children and with his wife. The 4 kids, James, David, Michael, and Judy all turned to heroin, while Donald turned to Eastern religion. I saw it as their ways of coping with their father's violence.
My name is Monica Gibson.
My name is Nina Gibson.
And Donald Gibson is our uncle. My dad is the oldest, David Gibson. Our whole lives growing up, our mom would tell us stories about our Uncle Donald.
She didn't really care much, to be around him. She just felt weary of him.
Even sometimes a little scared at times because of the things he would do.
She said that when he lived with my grandparents, his room was in the back, and she would see women and men go back there.
She just knew that it wasn't normal. She knew that it was off, it was wrong.
She was scared of him.
Donald had a very charismatic, magnetic kind of personality, and he seemed to zero in on what people needed in their lives or what they needed to hear, and it worked.
I call up Patty's friend, like a couple days later, and I start asking her about the cult in Merced. She refuses to tell me the name of the cult, and that she didn't want to talk to me, and she wanted an attorney. So from a police standpoint, that door just got shut hard. I tried to talk to the other people in the cult, but they wouldn't talk to me.
It's interesting that people who were a part of this cult many years ago to still be afraid today, and that would suggest to me the power Gibson had over them, and maybe the potential that they saw in him to harm them or incite his followers to do so.
I called Patty's friend about 3 months later and left her voicemail asking, hey, if you change your mind, can I talk to you? He never called me back. And when I tried to go investigate, the sheriff's office didn't have any records, the Merced Police Department didn't have any records, the district attorney's office didn't have any records. That's it.
It was a great shock when the man from the Park Service called me. I was emotionally ragged and raw. It has taken me many years to heal and gain insight into those years. I had to throw out most of what I believed and accepted to be true about myself, God, and my personal salvation. Finding some peace of heart and peace of mind has been a long, hard struggle. Donald brought Patty to Merced from Spokane, and I believe I met her in 1978. Donald asked me if I would take her in. I loved her from the first time I met her. I was raising 2 boys alone and working, had no social life, and it was nice having another woman in the house. I feel Patty was my saving grace. These photographs are from Patty's friend in Merced, California. Oh, wait till you see this.
Oh.
I love that picture. I want a copy of that one.
I do too.
Patty was a young woman looking for a purpose in her life. I never understood how Donald could attract intelligent, beautiful women to follow him. I never could figure that one out. But Donald attracted young males with sex and drugs. I remember a lot of attractive young men, all with a kind of glazed expression. I think they were mainly lost people looking for a place to fit in, a place to belong. Donald saw me as some sort of a potential cult member and said we would be wise to get in there while we could. But we had zero interest and never joined.
A lot of stuff happened in that cult. And some of that stuff was not good. My name is John Carlisle. I'm a retired probation officer. I worked in Merced County Probation for 35 years. At the time, cults were not common. The community itself was not supportive of Mr. Gibson or his followers. They thought those people were particularly strange and maybe dangerous.
I first heard the name Donald Gibson when I was working at Merced County Department of Mental Health. There were 4 people that worked there alongside me that were involved with this cult. I remember the mental health workers saying their paychecks were going to Donald. And this cult had obtained 3 houses, and the one on Alexander was supposed to be the main place where they would meet. Also, people would talk about some of the rituals that they had to perform. They were forced into arranged marriages, and then they had to perform these sexual rituals. I just remember being appalled by that.
I was made aware of Donald Gibson by meetings with the Sheriff's Department in Merced County. They were conducting an investigation of the person who was providing LSD to minors and taking advantage of the same minors sexually. There were 3 boys who came forward to explain about what was happening to them. One of the victims described meeting Donald Gibson in a park. And he said that he felt like he was in a trance. And he described losing consciousness. And when he came back to his senses, he found that he was being orally copulated by Mr. Gibson. And that was explained to him as a need to take his seed for a religious purpose. And that happened innumerable times. We prepared search warrants based on affidavits from the minors authorizing a search of the premises maintained by the cult.
I made a cobbler at the Alexander Avenue house and walked to Pecan House, where most of the men lived. Suddenly, I was grabbed by the police. They threatened to take my kids away. The police were in the house, tearing everything apart. Patty saw someone with a gun and freaked out and jumped out the window. She was out front on the ground being arrested. And later, Donald turned himself in.
During the search, the investigators found evidence of bizarre sexual practices. They found evidence of a lot of money that these cult members were supplying to this organization, thereby Mr. Gibson. And also, they did find evidence that he had been supplying LSD to young people and that there was some evidence of sexual abuse happening here.
We issued a complaint including furnishing LSD to minors and specific acts of sodomy and oral copulation between the minors and Donald Gibson. Then I was assigned the case for trial.
Until Donald was arrested and charged, I had no idea of the sexual abuse that was occurring on those young cult members. I was stunned when the charges were first read.
I think my jaw dropped. I was surprised about a lot of things that I wasn't aware of. It was a shock, I know, to all of us.
At the start of the trial, I personally came to believe that Donald Gibson had some power. I can understand why a young man would sense power in Gibson, as I felt it.
During the trial, we really got to look at how this cult operated and the amount of power that Mr. Gibson had over his followers. Some people described him as a predator, other people described him as manipulative, that he's a person that could take advantage of people, and other people didn't really see him as a threat.
Most of the people in the cult remained obedient to Gibson. But points during the trial when he was very angry that their testimony was not stronger than it was. I think that Gibson was capable of killing someone that he felt had failed him, including Patty Dahlstrom.
Donald Gibson was found guilty on 2 counts of oral copulation with minors and 2 counts of sodomy with minors. Total of 4 counts.
After the jury found Gibson guilty, I requested that the court take him into custody. And that's what should have happened. But he was out of custody. I don't think Gibson was stupid. He was aware that he was soon going to go into custody. He figured it was time to vamoose. Gibson failed to appear for his sentencing in November of 1981, and that was the last he was heard from.
The one thing that really surprised me was, during Donald Gibson's trial, nobody knew until years later that Cary Stayner was one of the spectators in that trial.
This was 1981. 17 years later, in 1999, Cary Stayner killed 4 people in and around Yosemite National Park.
The Stayner family and the Gibson family were friends. The Stayner family would go watch the kids of the Gibson family and vice versa. And even sometimes the Stayner grandparents would also watch the kids.
If Cary Stayner were in the courtroom when Patty was testifying, there could have been an innocent reason for it. He knew the Gibson family and he wanted to show support. But here's what's important. That would have been the opportunity for him to come into contact with Patty, who ultimately goes on to become a homicide victim. And you know that Cary Stayner went on to become a serial killer. That becomes an important piece of information that you have to resolve somehow.
Knowing that Cary Stayner was at Donald's trial makes me wonder, was there more of a connection there than we knew about?
Patty told me after Donald was gone for about a month that she felt like there was nothing left in Merced for her. Patty was wearing a blue down coat. The weather was turning cooler, getting cold. When I took her to the bus station, she wouldn't tell me what the destination was. I saw her leave through the back door. I can only assume she got on the bus to Yosemite. I grieved for her in a mighty way after she left. I was hurt and angry. It was like my rudder was broken and I was going around in endless, futile circles. I never gave up hope of Patty someday showing up at my front door. Oh, there she is.
I wish she was sitting right here with us.
Oh, gosh.
Reminiscing about old times.
I do too.
As the years have gone by, I started looking for Patty. Once the internet was established, I started searching for Patty Hicks, Patty Dahlstrom in California. And there's a whole lot of Patty Hickses, but not the one I was looking for. In 2022, I got a message on my phone from a woman who was doing a documentary that involved someone I went to high school with. And I knew it was about Patty. And I felt a tinge of dread making the call. But I called and found out that Patty had died and that it had been a long time ago. And that she was murdered.
When I first heard what happened to Patty, I was shocked. And I started crying. I cared a lot for her, and she was a sweetheart and did not deserve to be treated. Nobody deserves to be treated like this. It's just wrong.
Patty was vulnerable and she slipped into trusting and friendships with people that didn't have her best interest. I think that ultimately cost her life.
The hardest part about this whole story is we have concrete facts about Patty and the DNA work. We can't dispute that it's Patty. The hardest part about this whole thing is who killed her.
Kim and I had the Henry Lucas confession, but once our victim was identified, that opened the possibility of more suspects.
It's all kind of surreal now, thinking back and wondering who's responsible for the murder of Patty Hicks Dahlstrom. Was it Gibson? Or perhaps he called his old friend Cary Stayner.
When Colin informed me about our victim's identification and that she had been living in Merced, I did start wondering if it's possible that Cary Stayner could have had something to do with it. I thought about that a lot. He was from Merced. Our victim was living in Merced. I believe she'd been to Yosemite a number of times prior. He had been to Yosemite a number of times. I was curious, and I'm still curious.
I think it is possible that Cary Stayner did commit other murders before the 4 murders he was convicted of. But I would not elevate him to the status of suspect until we have physical evidence or eyewitness evidence that says he was there. He has to be ruled out.
But we just found no link to him that we could work on. I'm not going to say we didn't miss something, but we never found anything to link him to the Dahlstrom murder.
I believe that Mr. Gibson was capable of virtually any crime. I've prosecuted several people I thought were dearly evil, and he was one of them.
The Donald Gibson I remember, I don't think had it in him to put hands on Patty and kill her. I do think he had it in him to tell his followers to kill her.
I tried to investigate Gibson as much as I could, but there was essentially no leads or any whereabouts where he was. I contacted law enforcement in Merced County. They had no records of him besides being a fugitive after his trial, and that was it. So we didn't have any facts to go off of to further direct our investigation. Is it possible that Gibson killed her? Yes, it's possible. Is it possible that Cary Stayner killed her? Absolutely.
Well, this is how it all began.
So these are photos taken at the crime scene at Summit Meadow.
So there's the beer can.
There's the beer cans.
And that's the clincher for getting in.
What's that?
The beer cans and stuff.
Some lawmen still skeptical.
One of the ways to evaluate the self-reported information that came from Henry Lee Lucas is to develop a very detailed, what we call victimology of Patty. Who is Patty? What kinds of behaviors did Patty engage in? Getting the victimology means going to a variety of sources for information. From family members, from friends, from other people that knew her as she grew up. Maybe the fellow members of the cult.
When I heard about Henry Lee Lucas's encounter with Patty, I felt like he was talking about someone else. The Patty I knew was faithful in her walk with God. She was a lacto-vegetarian, chaste, and would never drink alcohol. She wouldn't have abandoned everything she believed in and practiced for years for a couple of beers, fried chicken, and a roll in the sack. That's not Patty.
Back in the 80s, if a prosecutor took this case to court, I believe that they would have had a difficult time getting a conviction based on a self-reported confession and based on the physical evidence that was available. So unfortunately, all these years later, it's very doubtful that this case is going to be resolved definitively.
My feeling is I am generally confident that Henry Lucas murdered our victim in Yosemite National Park. Absent any other evidence that would contravene that, I will continue to think that.
We didn't have good scientific proof that Henry did it. But I mean, nobody else could have described the spot the way he did unless they had been there and done that.
There's always going to be inconsistencies with Henry Lee Lucas' statement. I do feel after examining the facts we know about the crime scene, based on the evidence we have now, I think that Henry killed her. He knew where the crime scene was. He described the beer cans and the chicken bones being out there. He also pointed out on a map where this homicide occurred. And there's no way he could have known that stuff.
very difficult. It was extremely difficult, but I am very proud that at least her family knows she didn't deserve that. She had no choice in the matter. There had been so much effort and care put into this case over decades that it was incredible to finally have it confirmed who exactly she was.
Patricia Hicks Dahlstrom.
Eddie?
Humbling's not the right word. Satisfying's not the right word. I don't know if I can apply a word to it. It's about perseverance and science. I'm just in awe that finally, after all that, how science made it happen. And how the son of one of the original investigators that started this finished the case, to me, is just heartwarming. I mean, I get teared up just thinking about it. And how proud that Kim has to be of her son.
My greatest satisfaction about this case is that the victim was identified. Been a lot of time, a lot of miles. I'm Colin's mother, so of course I'm very proud of him. I wish that his father had lived to see this happen.
Patricia Dahlstrom was murdered, or she died somehow, and then her story just sat idle for 40 years. We just had to wait for the science to catch up, to actually identify Patty. And it took us 40 years to do it, but we did it. Right? When we didn't have to. There was no one telling us we had to do that. The Sun Meadow case was foundational to the Park Service Criminal Investigation Program. This case validates why we have to have criminal investigators in the Park Service. It's probably the most worthwhile, meaningful thing I've done so far in the Park Service.
She missed out on a lot. We were friends during our formative years, and she's a big part of who I am today. A big part of who Ruth is Eddie. And it's really difficult to think about someone as gentle and kind as Patty coming to a violent death. The violence is hard to think about.
She took one carefree day and went down the wrong road. I miss you, Patty.